This guy, okay? Colonel Sanders, the man behind Kentucky Fried Chicken, a franchise that has been running since 1952 and has been going for 72 years. That is a long time, and this guy clearly knows his stuff if he's been keeping it up for that long. But there are still many questions to be had about how this wrinkly old fellow managed to hold an entire enterprise up on his shoulders for that long. How did he manage to hold this entire franchise up for over 72 years? And what secrets lie underneath those flappy skin folds of his? And pray tell, how in the world did he actually become the Colonel? Sit tight, everyone, because today we're not going down the rabbit hole, but the chicken hole. Oh, what the f***, dude? Unless you're being flirty, I wouldn't be doing that again if I were you.
So let's start simple. Our story begins in Henryville, Indiana, where a farm couple with the names Wilbur Sanders and Margaret Sanders both decide to get down with their bad selves and have 3 children, one of whom was the soon-to-be Colonel himself, Harlan Sanders.
Since, he wasn't born a colonel, you don't come out of the hole with all your badge of honor stapled on you. It probably hurt way worse, actually.
Anyways, Harlan was the oldest of the 3 children, and he lived like this until Wilbur, the father, ended up dying 5 years later in 1895, leaving his mother Margaret as a widow who worked at a tomato cannery. This meant Harlan had to pretty much take care of himself and his siblings as their mother was out for long periods. But, thankfully, Harlan had learned some decent food making skills that he would be able to teach his siblings so that they could all scrounge for food while their mother was away.
The chicken hadn't come into the fray yet, but he was reportedly good with bread and vegetables, as well as practicing with meat, which is sure to be useful later.
As he grew up over time, he got into many different jobs, one of his earliest being as a wagoner in Cuba for the U.S. Army in 1906. He was honorably discharged in 1907, and this is when he started his spree of jobs all across the board.
And I'm being serious, by the way, when I say that. Throughout 1907 to 1929, this man did a bunch of different things. Like, he's pretty much the Steven Seagal of the early 20th century. He did technically have an earlier job as a farmhand in 1903 when he dropped out of 7th grade and moved to southern Indiana, but that only lasted him about 3 years, so I guess he got bored of it quickly.
Whether it was working as a fireman on the railroad or serving a law degree at university, Harlan worked his way up until 1930 when he got a free rent gas station from the Shell Oil Company as a gift from them for Harlan after he paid Shell Oil a percentage of his sales when he worked as an insurance salesman. And it was here, at this very moment, that history was made. So now we get to the true beginnings of KFC, where Harlan took his newly received gas station in Corbin, Kentucky, and reworked it into a restaurant where he would serve steaks, country ham, and of course, his iconic chicken. He grew very popular with the locals, so much so that he got into a shootout with another gas station owner named Matt Stewart. Nobody knows who pulled the gun first, but it's said that Stewart managed to get one person that Sanders was with, one of the Shell Oil employees named Robert Gibson, who got shot multiple times. Needless to say, after the fight, Stewart was given an 18-year-long prison sentence for murder.
Overall, not a good start for Harlan. But, thankfully, the rest of his life with this proto-KFC restaurant went smoothly, so much so that in 1935, he got an honorary commission as Kentucky Colonel by the governor of Kentucky, Ruby LaFoon.
Yes, you heard that right. This is the moment when Harlan finally got the iconic name as Colonel Sanders, although he wouldn't actually look the part until 1950. Unfortunately, another setback came in when in 1939 his gas station burned to the ground, but at the same time it allowed him to rebuild the place to be bigger and better than before. Now it's both a restaurant and a motel where customers can stay for the night after they ate their food. The new building was then named the Harlan Sanders Cafe, and it was also with this brand new building that the Colonel had finalized his famous 11 herbs and spices recipe, which he began making during his early years when he still had the original gas station. It was by 1950 that he was recommissioned again as a colonel, and was also when he donned his famous outfit, growing his iconic goatee while wearing his suit and string tie.
So it all seems pretty well and good for our boy Sanders so far, but even he knew that this all had potential, because in 1952 he took his 11 herbs and spices recipe, went to a businessman named Pete Hartman, and worked with him to create KFC as the official brand that we all know today.
After this, he began to travel the US to find a suitable restaurant to sell his recipe while keeping his original North Corbin business until 1956 when he closed it down and began his proper start with KFC in Salt Lake City, Utah. It was after this restaurant that he soon began to travel all over the US to various other restaurants to try and get them to allow him to cook his chicken. Some of them denied him, but others were like, hold up.
Let him come! Oh,
In all seriousness, no, after his, 1009th attempt, it was his 1010th attempt that he managed to get one restaurant to agree, and by the start of the 60s, many others followed suit.
Quickly expanding to over 600 restaurants by 1964, KFC had gained a reputation across the United States, with the Colonel's face being plastered upon every KFC restaurant open, which is what made him a cultural icon, as well as iconic line, "It's finger lickin' good," being originally from Pete Hartman, a man who helped franchise KFC with Sanders but was turned into the Colonel's catchphrase. Throughout the 60s and 70s, KFC had grown as a major success here in the States, but it seemed that while the success was plentiful, it eventually grew to become too much even for the Colonel himself to handle. He had to make some deals to keep his franchise afloat, one of which was selling the company to John Y. Brown Jr., a 29-year-old lawyer and also the future governor of Kentucky, and Jack C. Macy, a capitalist and entrepreneur. Sanders himself remained a part of the brand, however he stayed more as the ambassador of the brand rather than the direct owner. He began to appear in many commercials and advertisements to further sell the KFC brand, while Brown and Massey handled the business itself.
Throughout this time, the Colonel went through many different events, such as traveling the US to further sell the KFC brand, going to multiple restaurants to test their food, and even having him and his wife work together to create their own restaurant separate from the KFC brand, known as Claudia Sanders, the Colonel Ladies Dinner House, obviously named after the Colonel's then wife, Claudia Sanders herself. It's funny because this restaurant was originally a KFC restaurant itself, specifically opened during the 50s, but the Colonel then reopened it in 1968 as this newly branded restaurant due to him being unsatisfied with the recipe changes that KFC was making.
However, in 1971, this other restaurant was sued by the recent owner of KFC named Hublin Incorporated, which was another company that sold food products, but also alcoholic beverages, hotels, and even restaurants. The company sued Sanders due to him using his face for this competing restaurant as a sign of support, given that it was built from Sanders having dissatisfaction with KFC itself. Sanders then pulled a 180 on them and sued them back because Hublin was unlawfully selling products with the Colonel's face on them, despite them not being products he had made. The whole situation became a mess, but soon Hublin settled it with a $1 million payment to Sanders, and Sanders paid them back by changing the Claudia Sanders restaurant to simply Claudia Sanders Dinner House, with the references to himself being taken out. During this whole situation, the Colonel would reference Hublin, tossing insults at them in public and even on TV as a group who had no idea what it was doing.
Perhaps these insults weren't unfounded, however, as Hublin, during the 70s, was in control of KFC, and it was found that during this time they did very poorly overseas, such as with Hong Kong's KFC restaurant, which the company ended up abandoning in 1975 after only 2 years of operation.
At this point, Hublin decided to hire Michael A. Miles to manage the business in 1977, and he was credited with saving the company and bringing them back to basics, as his plan for operating the restaurants was called. During the late 70s and 80s, KFC managed to rise back up again, and Michael managed to bring back in the Colonel to listen to his recommendation on how to continue running the business. However, once 1980 came around, tragedy struck, as Colonel Harlan Sanders passed away due to pneumonia at the age of 90, where he'd reportedly traveled 200,000 to 250,000 miles a year and had spent all his time promoting his product for the enterprise he made and loved. By the time of the Colonel's passing, there were an estimated 6,000 KFC outlets in 48 countries worldwide, and a total of $2 billion in sales. Come the present day, and that number has shot up to 29.9 thousand restaurants and $2.83 billion in sales.
Despite his passing in 1980, the Colonel remained as the iconic image of KFC even to the present day, where he is still plastered on many restaurants, including here in Indiana as well as many other states. He helped to make possibly one of the greatest chicken-based restaurant brands in the entire world, and you know what? I think he honestly deserves that praise. Godspeed, Colonel. May you sell more chicken for more people to enjoy. But still, why'd you make your beard the shape of a walnut?